Most people believe the Canadian wilderness is a place of serene beauty and quiet reflection, but those who live near the deep woods of Ontario know a much darker truth exists, a truth buried under layers of pine needles and ancient frozen earth. What I am about to share with you is not a campfire story or a local legend whispered to scare tourists, because the police reports and the recovered thermal footage from the 2024 Ontario forest incident tell a story that defies every law of nature we hold dear. If you are watching this alone in the dark, I suggest you turn on a light, because by the end of this account, you will never look at the tree line the same way again. The disappearance of the Miller family began on a Tuesday afternoon when the air was unnaturally still. Their campsite was found perfectly intact, with food still simmering on a portable stove, yet there was not a single footprint leading away from the site in any direction. Search and rescue teams were baffled by the lack of physical evidence or signs of a struggle. They noted that even the local wildlife seemed to have fled the area entirely, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight on the chest of the responders. It was only when a veteran tracker named Elias joined the search that the first true anomaly was discovered. Elias claimed he found a series of markings high up in the canopy of the old-growth maples. These were not claw marks from a bear or a cougar, but rather long, thin indentations that looked like elongated finger grips, as if something had been swinging from the heights while watching the camp below. He refused to stay in the woods after sundown, citing a rotten sweetness in the air that he associated with ancient entities. His warnings were largely ignored by the younger officers, who believed they were simply dealing with a sophisticated kidnapper or a momentary lapse in geographical judgment. By the third night of the search, the temperature dropped to a record low, and the first of the digital recorders picked up a sound that no human throat could ever produce. The audio began as a low-frequency hum that vibrated the very bones of the searchers. It slowly transitioned into a perfect mimicry of Mrs. Miller's voice calling out for her youngest son. But the pitch was slightly off, as if the words were being played through a broken underwater speaker. One rookie officer was so convinced the cry was real that he broke protocol and ran into the dense brush. His flashlight beam danced wildly against the black trunks before suddenly extinguishing without a sound or a scream. When his partner reached the spot where he had vanished, they found only his radio lying in a circle of scorched grass. The plastic casing of the device had melted into a shape resembling a distorted human face, yet the surrounding brush remained freezing cold to the touch. The search was officially halted as a sense of primal dread took hold of the team. They realized they were no longer the hunters, but were being systematically observed by something that moved between the shadows of the trees. Back at the command post, the thermal cameras began to glitch, capturing tall, spindly silhouettes that stood over 7 feet tall and possessed limbs that bent at impossible backwards angles. These entities did not walk so much as they glided through the undergrowth. Their eyes reflected no light because they seemed to absorb the very essence of the forest's darkness, and every time the cameras focused on them, the feed would dissolve into static and high-pitched shrieks. The lead investigator refused to sign off on the official report. He claimed that the shapes in the woods were not flesh and blood, but something much older, a manifestation of a hunger that has resided in the Ontario basin since before the first settlers arrived, something the indigenous elders referred to as the whispering skin. According to their oral histories, these beings are not ghosts, but guardians of a void. They lure the living by projecting their deepest fears or their most desperate hopes, and once you step into their circle of influence, you are no longer part of this physical dimension. As the investigation deepened, they recovered a GoPro camera belonging to the eldest Miller son. The footage contained within was so disturbing that the provincial government immediately classified it as a matter of national security. The video shows the family sitting inside their tent while a rhythmic tapping sounds from the roof. They are whispering to each other about a tall man with no face standing just beyond the mesh zip, and the father can be seen gripping a hatchet with knuckles turned white from the strain. Suddenly, the tapping stops and a hand with 8-inch fingers presses against the fabric. The fabric of the tent does not tear, but rather dissolves like mist under the touch of the entity. The screams of the children are abruptly cut off as if the air was sucked out of their lungs, and the camera falls into the dirt, recording only a pair of pale, elongated feet hovering inches above the ground. There are no sounds of dragging or struggle captured on the microphone. Instead, there is only the sound of 1,000 insects chirping in perfect, terrifying unison, a sound that signals the successful harvest of a human soul by the entities of the deep woods. For weeks after the incident, hikers reported seeing the Miller children standing at the edge of the highway, But when the cars would slow down to help, the figures would elongate and vanish into the canopy like smoke. The official cause of the disappearance remains unexplained environmental tragedy. But those who have seen the unredacted files know that the Millers are still in that forest. They are just no longer residing in the world of the living. Even now, as you listen to this, there are parts of the Ontario wilderness that remain strictly off limits to the public. The government has erected fences that lead to nowhere and posted guards who refuse to look into the trees. They know that the whispering skin is currently dormant, but is slowly waking up for its next cycle of feeding. If you ever find yourself driving through those northern roads and feel a sudden urge to pull over and look at the stars, please remember the Miller family and the rookie officer who followed a voice he thought he knew. The silence of the woods is never empty. It is filled with the presence of things that have forgotten what it means to be human, and they are always waiting for someone to listen just a little too closely to the wind. There is a specific coordinate in the heart of the forest where the compass needles spin in frantic circles. This is said to be the gateway where the entities cross over from the gray realm into our reality, and it is here that the air smells most strongly of that rotten, cloying sweetness. Local hunters avoid the area even during the brightest days of summer. They tell stories of the mimic, which can take the form of your own shadow and pull you into the earth, leaving behind only your clothes and a feeling of profound, icy emptiness in the surrounding air. If you ever see a tree in the forest that looks like it is bleeding dark, thick sap in the shape of a human hand, do not touch it and do not look back as you run for your life. The Ontario forest incident was not a tragedy, but a warning to all of humanity, a reminder that we are merely guests on a planet that belonged to much darker things, long before we learned to walk upright. Keep your doors locked and your eyes away from the dark corners of your room tonight, because sometimes when you look into the forest of the screen, the forest looks back into you, and the things that live there are very, very hungry for your attention.